I guess everyone has that one neighbor, the one who treats the shared street like their own personal kingdom. But let me tell you, until you've lived in a place where a lawn measurement of a quarter-inch too high results in a legal threat, you haven't truly seen the dark side of the American dream. My name's Elias Thorne. I'm a 42-year-old high-voltage lineman, a job that basically requires me to keep a cool head while holding enough electricity to vaporize a person. So I like to think I'm a pretty patient guy, or at least I was until I moved into Silver Oaks. It was supposed to be my fresh start after a messy divorce, a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs of Pennsylvania where my two kids, Leo and Maya, could have enough space to breathe. But what I didn't in Oppos, T realized, was that I'd bought a house right next door to the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, a woman named Beverly Vance. Now, Beverly was 60 going on 80, a retired auditor who looked like she'd been preserved in lemon juice and bitterness, and she drove this massive, charcoal gray Lincoln Navigator that she handled with the grace of a runaway freight train. The first time it happened, I actually thought it was a freak accident. Just one of those things that happens when someone's running late and doesn't in Oppos. To check their mirrors. It was a Tuesday morning, the air was crisp, and I just hauled the heavy plastic bin down to the curb for the 6 a.m. pickup. But as I was back inside pouring my first cup of coffee, I heard this sickening hollow crunch that echoed through the house. I ran to the window just in time to see the tail lights of that gray Navigator disappearing around the corner, leaving my trash bin shattered into a dozen pieces and my week's worth of household waste decorating the asphalt like some kind of suburban disaster zone. I spent 30 minutes in the freezing damp, picking up eggshells and soggy cardboard while my kids watched from the porch, looking confused and a little embarrassed for me. And when I saw Beverly later that afternoon, she didn't in Oppos. T apologized. She just stood there on her porch with a clipboard, looking at me with this thin, bloodless smile and said, and quote, "Elias, I've told the board that these oversized bins are a navigation hazard for residents. Perhaps if you placed it further back on grass, this wouldn't and Oppos to be an issue," and quote. The thing is, the city ordinance specifically says bins have to be within 3 feet of the pavement for the mechanical arm of the truck to reach them. And if I moved it back, the trash guys wouldn't and Oppos. T pick it up, which I tried to explain to her, but she just gave me this look, the kind you give a stray dog that's barked one too many times and walked back inside without another word. Over the next 3 weeks, she did it 5 more times, and it wasn't Oppos. T just in quote, tapping in quote. Them anymore, she was actively aiming for the bins, using the heavy steel bumper of that Navigator to pulverize the plastic until I was spending $60 a week at the hardware store just to have something to put my trash in. It became this bizarre morning ritual. I'd set the bin out, she'd wait until she saw me watching from the window, and then she'd deliberately swing the back end of that beast around and crack. Another bin down, another smug wave as she drove off to her Pilates class, or whatever it is people like that do with their time. I try to be the bigger person. I really did. I went to the HOA board meeting to complain, but as soon as I stood up, I realized I'd walked into a rigged game because sitting right there next to the board president was Beverly, smiling like the cat that ate the canary. The president, a guy named Arthur who looked like he had an Oppos. He had an original thought since the 90s, basically told me that since I was, in quote, the new guy, in quote, I should probably just focus on fitting in rather than making waves about, in quote, minor traffic incidents, in quote. That night, I sat in my garage, staring at the shattered remains of bin number 6, and I realized that Beverly was an Oppos. T just a cranky neighbor. She was a bully who was using her position to push me around because she thought I was an easy target, a tired dad, just trying to keep his head above water. But here's the thing about being a lineman. We're trained to find the source of a short circuit and fix it, no matter how much it hurts. So I called up my old buddy Silas, who runs a masonry crew, and told him I needed a very specific kind of favor. We spent the following Saturday inside my closed garage, the kids helping me mix bags of high-strength industrial concrete while we listened to the radio, and we basically built a Trojan horse out of garbage. We took a standard-looking heavy-duty plastic bin, the exact same model Beverly had been destroying, and we reinforced the entire interior with a cage of half-inch steel rebar before filling the bottom third with 300 pounds of solid, vibrating set concrete. We left a hollow space in the top for a small bag of actual trash, so it looked authentic, and we finished the exterior with the same scuff marks and city logo as the old ones, But underneath that thin plastic shell was a solid block of immovable defiance. I knew that the next time Beverly decided to play demolition derby, she wasn't oppos. She going to be hitting a flexible plastic container. She was going to be hitting the equivalent of a bridge abutment. And I checked the bylaws 10 times over. There was absolutely nothing that regulated the internal weight or material of a trash receptacle, only its external dimensions. Tuesday morning rolled around, and I felt a knot of nervous excitement in my stomach as I rolled that 300-pound monster down to the curb. It took everything I had to make it look like I was struggling with a normal load. I went inside, sat in the dark kitchen with my coffee, and waited, and right on cue, at 6:12 a.m., the Navigator's engine rumbled to life in the driveway next door. I saw Beverly come out, adjust her sunglasses even though the sun was and oppos, even up yet, and back out of her driveway with that aggressive, practiced tilt she always used, and I could see her through her tinted windows. She was actually smirking as she lined up the rear quarter panel of her luxury SUV with my bin. She didn't in oppos. Just tap it. She gave it the gas, intending to send it flying across the yard like she usually did. But instead of the usual crunch, there was a sound I will never forget, a deep, metallic thud followed by the screeching, agonizing groan of expensive German engineering being folded like a soda can. The Navigator didn't in oppos. Just stop. It bounced, the entire rear end of the vehicle buckled, the bumper was pushed into the rear tire, and the quarter panel crinkled like aluminum foil while the trash bin didn't in oppos. Move an inch, it just sat there, looking bored. Beverly's head snapped back from the impact, and for a solid minute, there was just silence in the street, no engine noise, just the sound of my own heart thumping in my chest. She stumbled out of the car, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, and she stared at the wreckage of her $12,000 repair bill and then at the bin, which had a tiny scratch on the plastic. I walked out onto my porch, taking a slow sip of coffee, and I just said, in quote, "Morning, Beverly, looks like those narrow streets finally got the best of you. You want me to call a tow truck, or should I just leave you to assess the navigation hazards?" End quote. She was purple with rage, screaming about how I'd booby-trapped my property and how she was going to have me arrested, but I just pointed to my Ring camera and reminded her that she was the one who had backed into a stationary object on a public street for the 7th time in a month. But that was just the beginning, because once I started pulling on the thread of why Beverly felt so untouchable, the whole sweater started to unravel in ways I never expected. See, I'd started documenting everything. Not just the crashes, but the fines she'd been handing out, and I noticed that the, in quote, maintenance fees, in quote, for our neighborhood had spiked by 40% since she'd joined the board, yet the pool was green and the streetlights were flickering. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what Beverly did best. I started auditing. I used my professional credentials to look into the contractors the HOA was using for, in quote, emergency repairs, in quote, and I found a company called VTech Solutions that was getting paid $5,000 a month for, in quote, consulting, in quote. It didn't in oppos. Take a genius to figure out that the, in quote, V, in quote, in VTech stood for Vance. Beverly had been funneling our community dues into a shell company owned by her nephew, and she'd been using the fine she levied against people like me to pad the account whenever the balance got low. She wasn't in oppos. Just a mean neighbor. She was a predator who was literally stealing the college funds and mortgage payments of the families in this neighborhood. And she'd been doing it because everyone was too scared of her clipboard to look at the ledgers. When I brought the folder of evidence to the next board meeting, I didn't in oppos. Go to Arthur. I went to the state in oppos, as attorney's office first. And I'll tell you, there is no feeling in the world quite like watching a woman who thinks she's the queen of the world realize that her throne is made of stolen glass. The meeting was packed. People were tired of the, in quote, Karen, in quote, energy, but when I laid out the bank statements and the shell company filings, the room went from cold to boiling in about 10 seconds, and Beverly, for the first time in her life, had absolutely nothing to say. She tried to claim it was and quote, clerical misunderstanding, end quote, but the police officers waiting in the back of the room didn't end oppos. Seemed to care much for her definitions of accounting. By the time the dust settled, the HOA board was dissolved, The management company was under federal investigation, and Beverly was forced to sell her house to pay back the nearly $90,000 she'd embezzled over the years. The last time I saw her, she was packing her things into a U-Haul, her Navigator still sporting a massive, unpainted primer gray patch on the back where Silas's concrete had left its mark, and she looked at me with this hollow, defeated stare that almost made me feel bad for her. Almost. But then I thought about Leo and Maya and how they'd spent months worried about when the next, accident, was going to happen, and I just went back to mowing my lawn, making sure it was exactly 2.5 inches tall. Just for the irony of it. The neighborhood is different now. People actually talk to each other. We have barbecues where nobody's checking the color of your patio furniture. And that concrete bin? I still use it every Tuesday. It's a bit of a workout to get it down the driveway. But every time I hear the trash truck pick it up, it reminds me that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to be the one thing they can into Oppos. Team move. But now that the queen is gone, I've noticed a few people starting to grumble about the new board in Oppos. S rules on street parking, and it makes me wonder, is it the person that makes the HOA toxic? Or does the power of the clipboard eventually turn everyone into a version of Beverly? I'd love to know if you think I went too far with the concrete, or if you've ever had a bill day fortress just to survive your own neighborhood, because honestly, I'm starting to think the real American dream, ISN and Oppos. The white picket fence. It's the peace of mind you get when the person on the other side of it finally learns their lesson.